What would you do if the men who killed your father sent you to disappear quietly in his penthouse instead? Cry. Beg him. I let my soaked dress hit his marble floor, wrapped myself in his towel like I owned the place, and whispered the only thing that mattered. You won't last one night. The look on his face, priceless. The storm hadn't let up in an hour, and neither had he. Min, who stood with his back pressed flat against the wall of his own bedroom, tie loosened, jaw tight, watching me like I was the loaded gun in the room instead of the woman who owed him $200,000 she didn't have. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling windows held the whole skyline hostage, gold light bleeding up from streets that had no idea what was happening 40 floors above them. Behind me, his bed sat untouched, the kind of red velvet that cost more than my bakery's monthly rent. I hadn't asked to be here. I definitely hadn't asked for the wine he'd accidentally tipped onto my dress 20 minutes earlier, the dress that was now a wrecked heap on his bathroom tile, while I stood in his towel, dripping, daring him to look away first. He didn't. You think this is funny, he said. Not a question. Men who didn't ask questions. He made statements and waited for the world to agree with him. I think, I said, hitching the towel a little higher, watching his eyes flick down and snap back up like he'd been burned, that you brought me here to scare me, and instead you spilled Merlot on the one dress I own that doesn't have flower stains on it. So no, I don't think this is funny. I think it's embarrassing. For you. Something moved behind his expression, not quite a flinch, but close enough that I filed it away like a recipe I'd want to use again. This was the part nobody warned me about. They'd told me men who buried men for less than what I owed him. They told me he didn't blink, didn't bargain, didn't miss. What they didn't tell me was that underneath all that tailored black wool was a man who had clearly never once in his life been laughed at. So I laughed. Soft. Real. The kind of laugh that comes out before you can stop it. You won't last one night, I said again, quieter this time, like a secret instead of a dare. Not with me in the room. The lights flickered. Once. Twice. Then the whole building dropped into darkness, the storm finally winning the fight it had been threatening all evening. And somewhere 39 floors below us, in a stairwell nobody was supposed to know about, for men in wet coats started climbing. Neither of us knew that yet. All I knew, standing in a dead man's debt and a stranger's towel, watching the most feared man in the city forget how to breathe normally, was this. I had walked in here expecting to beg for my life. Instead, I was about to find out exactly how long he'd last. The envelope was the kind of cream you only saw on wedding invitations and eviction notices, and I knew which one this was before I even slid it open. I'd been icing 30 cupcakes for a baby shower that probably wasn't going to get paid for either. Flour ghosted up to my elbows, radio playing something my dad would have hummed along to off-key. The bakery still smelled like him, 3 years after the funeral. Burnt sugar and cheap coffee and the particular dust that settles into a building nobody has the money to renovate. I'd kept it open out of stubbornness more than sense. Turns out stubbornness doesn't pay creditors. The letter didn't waste time being polite. Final notice. Balance due in full. And then, beneath it, a line that made the radio static out in my ears. Mr. Min, who requests your presence personally. Not a collector. Not a lawyer. Him. I called my dad's old accountant, Priya, because she was the only person who still picked up when I panicked. She went quiet on the phone in a way that told me everything before she said a word. Alexa. Her voice had that careful, funeral home softness. People don't get summoned by men who. People get a phone call from someone who works for someone who works for him. If he wants to see you himself, that's not customer service. That's a verdict. So what, I just don't go? You go, she said. You just don't go expecting to negotiate. I sat on the bakery floor that night surrounded by unsold cupcakes and my father's unpaid debts, and I let myself be scared for exactly 4 minutes. Clock on the wall. I timed it, because 4 minutes felt like the most I could afford. Then I got up, because crying didn't put frosting on anything, and frosting was the only thing I knew how to control anymore. Everyone had a story about Min Who. The councilman who crossed him and disappeared into early retirement upstate. The rival who tried to muscle into his shipping routes and was never seen muscling into anything again. Nobody had a story about a baker. I'd be the first, one way or another. I picked the only dress I owned that didn't have flour ground into the seams. Navy, 2 seasons old, a little tight since grief had quietly added curves I'd stopped apologizing for. And I told myself the same thing my father used to say when a wedding cake collapsed 40 minutes before the reception. You don't get to fall apart on the clock. The storm clouds were already rolling in over Brooklyn by the time I locked the bakery door behind me. Debt notice folded into my purse like a death warrant I refused to read twice. I didn't know yet that I was about to meet the one man in the city who'd never once been told no. I was about to be the first. The storm hit before I made it 3 blocks from the subway, the kind of rain that doesn't fall so much as throw itself at you personally. By the time the doorman waved me into the lobby of a building that probably cost more than my entire neighborhood, my navy dress was plastered to me, my hair was a ruined sculpture, and my mascara had given up entirely. I looked less like a woman walking into a verdict and more like something dragged out of the East River. I decided, somewhere around the 4th floor elevator mirror, that I wasn't going to apologize for it. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. No hallway, no buffer, just suddenly there, dripping on a floor so polished it looked insulted by my presence. The whole apartment was glass and shadow, the skyline glittering behind it like he'd ordered it special. And in the middle of all that calculated perfection stood the only man in the city, apparently, who didn't own an umbrella policy for his own emotions. Men who didn't stand up to greet me. He didn't need to. He had the kind of stillness that did all the talking. Dark suit, no tie loosened, hands folded like he was waiting for a verdict of his own, except his version of waiting looked a lot more comfortable than mine. "You're soaked," he said. Not a question, a fact, delivered the way you'd note the weather. I noticed. "Thank you for the update." I wrung a little water out of my sleeve onto his floor, mostly out of spite. "Your doorman didn't think to offer me a towel," which feels like a real gap in the 5-star treatment. Something flickered behind his eyes. Not quite surprise, but the cousin of it. People probably didn't talk to him like furniture wasn't more interesting. "You know why you're here." "I know I owe you money my father borrowed before I could legally drink," I said. "I know I've spent 3 years trying to keep his bakery from dying the same slow death he did. And I know that if you wanted me scared, you should have sent someone scarier than a guy who matches his cufflinks to his mood lighting." His jaw tightened, just barely, the first real crack in all that composure. "You think I'm not scary?" "I think," I said, peeling a strand of wet hair off my face with as much dignity as a drowned woman can manage, "that you're used to people groveling before they even sit down. I haven't sat down. I'm not going to grovel. And honestly, I've survived worse storms than you." For one full second, men who, the man 4 different people had warned me buried problems instead of solving them, looked like he genuinely didn't know what to do with me. It was, without question, the best I'd felt all week. He let the silence sit there a moment, like he was deciding which version of himself I'd actually earned. Then he stood. It wasn't dramatic, no chair scraping, no raised voice, but the room seemed to recalibrate around him anyway, the way a kitchen goes quiet when the oven timer's about to go off, and everyone braces without knowing why. He crossed the marble slowly, hands still loose at his sides, and stopped close enough that I had to tilt my chin up to keep looking at him instead of his tie. "You should be careful," he said, voice dropped to something low and even, "about how you talk to me. People who forget who I am don't usually get a second conversation." It was, objectively, a good threat. Practiced. The kind that had probably worked on senators and shipping magnates and men twice his size. I could see why everyone in this city flinched at his name. I didn't flinch, mostly because I was too busy being annoyed that he thought it would work on a woman who'd spent the last 3 years watching the bank, the landlord, and her own grief try to break her and lose. "Careful," I repeated, like I was tasting the word. "You dragged me out in a hurricane, skipped the part where you actually ask for your money, and now you're doing the slow walk and quiet voice thing. I've seen scarier moves at a PDA meeting." His eyes narrowed, just barely. "You think this is a joke?" "I think," I said, stepping in instead of back, which I could tell genuinely startled him, "that you've spent so long being the scariest thing in every room that you forgot what it looks like when someone isn't impressed. That's not fear, by the way. That's just exhaustion wearing a navy dress." For a second, neither of us said anything. Rain kept hammering the windows behind him. The city smeared into gold and gray streaks, and I watched something shift behind his eyes. Not anger exactly, more like recalculation. Like I'd handed him a problem his usual tools couldn't solve. I leaned in, close enough that I probably shouldn't have, and let my voice drop to match his. You want to scare me, Minhu? A small laugh escaped before I could stop it. Real, unplanned, the kind that surprises you on the way out. You won't last one night. He blinked. Actually blinked, like the words had physically landed somewhere he wasn't used to being touched. Excuse me. You heard me. I didn't look away. Everyone in this city is so busy being terrified of you that nobody's ever called your bluff. I just did. So, one night. You, me, whatever you think this is supposed to be. Let's see who actually lasts. Outside, the lights flickered once, a small, electric warning neither of us noticed yet. And Minhu, the most feared man in the city, looked at me like he'd just lost a negotiation he didn't know he was having. The lights gave one last flicker, like the building was clearing its throat, and then the whole penthouse dropped into darkness. For a second, neither of us moved. The skyline outside went with it in patches, entire blocks of Brooklyn blinking out like someone was snuffing candles one by one. The storm finally winning the argument it had been threatening all night. Thunder rolled somewhere close enough to rattle the windows. Minhu's silhouette was the only steady thing in the room, backlit by the dying glow of emergency lights kicking in along the baseboards. That's not great, I said, mostly to fill the silence, because apparently even mortal peril couldn't fully shut me up. He was already moving, pulling a phone from his jacket, thumb tapping the screen with the calm efficiency of a man who'd clearly planned for every disaster except this exact one. Grids down across 3 boroughs, he said after a moment, voice flat in that way I was starting to recognize as his version of alarmed. Elevators are dead. Buildings running on backup, lobby level only. Great. So I'll just take the stairs. 41 flights. He said it like he was almost enjoying this. In heels. In that dress. I looked down at my ruined navy dress, still faintly damp, and then back up at him, and decided arguing with physics wasn't going to be a winning strategy tonight. Fine. I'll call a cab. Streets are flooding 2 blocks over. Half the bridges are already closed. He set the phone down on the counter with a quiet finality that felt less like information and more like a verdict. You're not getting home tonight. There it was, the thing I'd been too busy being brave to actually think through. No subway running, no car coming, no version of this where I walked out that door and back into my own life before sunrise. Just me, a man 4 people had warned me about, and a building going dark floor by floor like the city itself was holding its breath. This wasn't part of the deal, I said, and for the first time since I'd walked in soaked and furious, my voice came out a little smaller than I meant it to. Minhu studied me for a long moment in the half-light, something unreadable working behind his expression, not quite smug, not quite kind, somewhere uncomfortably in between. No, he agreed. It wasn't. He didn't offer comfort. He didn't apologize for a storm he obviously hadn't ordered, even if some small petty part of me wanted to blame him anyway. He just walked to a cabinet near the window, pulled out 2 candles and a lighter like a man who kept a blackout kit because chaos found him often enough to plan for it, and set them on the table between us. Looks like you're staying, he said. Let's see if you meant what you said. Outside, the last light on the block went dark. He poured the wine to be polite. I think. Some peace offering disguised as hospitality. 2 glasses of something dark and expensive he probably kept around for guests who weren't currently his hostages. I was reaching for mine when the building groaned through another gust of wind. The floor tilted exactly enough to matter, and the whole glass ended up down the front of my dress instead of in my mouth. Of course, I said, looking down at the spreading stain like it was the final insult in a very long list. Of course it does this now. Minhu, to his credit, didn't laugh. He also didn't quite manage not to look like he wanted to. There's a shower through there, he said, nodding toward a hallway lit by one flickering emergency bulb. I'll find you something to wear. Something turned out to be a white towel the size of a bedsheet, folded on the marble counter like even his linens had impeccable manners. I peeled the ruined dress off in a bathroom bigger than my apartment, stood under hot water in the dark, and let myself have exactly 30 seconds of feeling sorry for myself before deciding that wasn't a good use of the time I had left before sunrise. When I came out, towel wrapped and tucked the way you learn to do when you've spent a lifetime making your own clothes work for your own body. Minhu was standing by the window with his back to me, giving me what I assumed was meant to be privacy. He turned around anyway. Of course he did. I watched it happen in real time. The exact moment the city's most feared man forgot how to be unbothered. His eyes moved, then very deliberately stopped moving, then flicked back up to my face like he'd been caught somewhere he hadn't meant to look. His jaw went tight. His hand found the back of a chair like he needed somewhere to put it. I didn't reach for the dress, even though it was draped right there, dry now, returned by whoever ran his household even mid-blackout. I just stood there, towel cinched at my chest, dripping slightly onto his very expensive rug, watching him not know what to do with his own hands. "You're staring," I said, mostly to enjoy it. "I'm not." He absolutely was. Minhu. I let his name sit in my mouth like I owned it. I've spent my whole life being looked at like I'm supposed to apologize for it. I'm not going to start now because you're nervous. I'm not nervous. You're holding a chair like it's a life raft. He let go of the chair, slowly, like that would undo the last 10 seconds. Outside, lightning lit the room white for one full second, long enough to catch his expression, not fear, not quite. Something closer to a man realizing, very late, that he might actually lose this dare. "You're a strange woman," he said finally. "You're a scared one," I said. "We're getting somewhere." I changed back into the dry dress eventually, mostly because I figured I'd made my point and didn't need to win the same argument twice in one night. We ended up at his kitchen island, candles burning low between us. A bottle of bourbon he'd produced from somewhere like it was the one piece of furniture he actually trusted in a crisis. "This is good," I said, after the first sip burned its way down. Suspiciously good for a man who threatens people for a living. "I don't threaten people. I inform them of consequences." He said it without irony, which somehow made it funnier. That's the most threatening sentence I've ever heard a person say while pouring me a drink. He almost smiled. I was starting to clock the shape of it. A small flicker at one corner of his mouth that he caught and corrected, like smiling was a security risk he hadn't cleared. "You're not scared of me," he said. Not a question, but softer than the version of that sentence he'd used hours earlier. "No. Most people are scared of me before I've said a word." "Most people," I said, turning my glass slowly, "have never had a landlord, a bank, and a dying parent's debt all come for them in the same calendar year. You're intimidating. You're not the scariest thing I've survived. Not even close." That seemed to cost him something to hear. Not offense, more like recalibration, the same look he'd worn when I dared him the first time. He was quiet for a moment, candlelight doing something unfair to the sharp lines of his face. "My father ran shipping routes before this was shipping routes," he said finally, like the words had to be pried loose. "I was 12 the first time someone tried to kill him at the dinner table. I learned to stop flinching before I learned long division. That's not a childhood. That's a hostage situation with good furniture." "It worked." He said it like a man defending a wound, not a strategy. "It worked," I agreed, gentler than I meant to be. "And it also means nobody's looked you in the eye and meant it in a long time." He didn't answer that. He didn't have to. I watched it land somewhere behind his ribs. "What are you scared of?" he asked instead. "If not me." I thought about the bakery, my father's apron still hanging by the door I never moved. Every room I'd walked into where eyes slid past me to someone smaller, someone they decided was easier to see. "Being unseen," I said. Not feared, not even disliked. Just skipped over. Like I take up the room, but never the attention in it. Minhu looked at me then, fully, the way he hadn't quite managed in the bathroom doorway. Like he was finally doing the thing everyone else forgot to do. "I see you," he said. It was, infuriatingly, the first thing all night that actually. The sound that broke the moment wasn't subtle. A crash from somewhere near the service stairwell, metal against metal, followed by voices that weren't speaking English and definitely weren't friendly. Minhu was off the stool before I'd even processed what I'd heard, every soft edge from the last hour gone like it had never existed. He crossed to a cabinet near the hallway, pulled it open, and the candlelight caught on something dark and metal that made my stomach drop in a very different way than it had all night. "Get down behind the island," he said, low and fast, already moving toward the door. "Now, Alexa." "Who is that?" "Sokolov." He said the name like a curse he'd used too many times to flinch it anymore. They've been waiting for a night exactly like this one. I should have gotten down. I should have made myself small the way I'd spent half my life being told to, folding into whatever corner was available, waiting for someone else to handle it. Instead, I grabbed the heavy oak chair beside me and shoved it under the door handle of the hallway entrance, wedging it tight against the frame the way my father used to brace the bakery's back door during storms that threatened to take it off the hinges. Min Hu turned, gun already in hand, and looked at me like I'd grown a second head. I told you to get down. You also told me streets were flooding and elevators were dead, so forgive me for not assuming your plan covers gunmen too. I was already dragging a second chair, breath sharp in my chest, hands steadier than I expected them to be. Help me with this, or stand there being impressed. He helped. We wedged the heavy console table against the main door next, glass votives rattling off the edge and shattering across the marble in bright little explosions that sounded, absurdly, like the world's worst dessert plating. Voices got closer on the other side, boots on stone, low and confident in the way of men who'd never once had a plan fail. You should be hiding, Min Hu said, voice tight, eyes on the door even as he said it. I should be a lot of things. I grabbed a heavy lamp off the side table, hefting it like a bat, because it was the only weapon a baker actually knew how to swing. Hiding's never once solved a single problem I've had. The door shuddered once, hard, the chair groaning under the impact. Min Hu angled himself between me and the entrance without seeming to decide to do it, like his body had made the choice before his mind caught up. Stay behind me. Wasn't planning on going anywhere, I said, and meant it in a way that surprised us both. Glass crunched under someone's boot on the other side of the door. The lights, what little backup power remained, flickered once more. And then the door gave way. It was over faster than it felt like it lasted, the way real danger always cheats you out of the time you think you're owed. The first man through the door met Min Hu's aim before he'd fully cleared the frame. The second one I never saw clearly, just a blur of motion, a lamp connecting with something solid in my hands, the satisfying, terrible crunch of porcelain doing a job it was never designed for. Someone shouted. Glass kept breaking underfoot like the whole apartment was made of things meant to shatter tonight. And then, as quickly as it had started, it stopped. 2 men down, a third retreating back through the stairwell door faster than his friends had come in, and a silence so total it rang in my ears louder than the gunfire had. Min Hu lowered his weapon slowly, chest rising and falling hard, eyes scanning the room once, twice, like he didn't trust the quiet yet. Then he looked at me. I was still holding the lamp, both hands shaking now that there was nothing left to swing it at, a thin cut stinging along my forearm from glass I didn't remember catching. I opened my mouth to say something sharp, something to cover the fact that my knees had just discovered they were made of water, and that's when he crossed the room in 3 strides and took my face in both hands like he needed to confirm I was real. You're bleeding, he said, and his voice had lost every ounce of the calm he'd spent the whole night weaponizing. It's a scratch. You could have died. It came out rougher than I'd heard him say anything, control fraying at the edges in a way that didn't match the man who'd informed me of consequences over bourbon an hour ago. You should have stayed down. Why didn't you stay down? Because hiding's never. I know what you said. His thumb brushed the cut on my arm, gentle in a way that didn't fit anything else about him. I've had men die in front of me, and felt less than I just felt watching that door open with you behind me. I went still. The most feared man in the city, the one 4 different people had warned me buried problems instead of solving them, was standing in a wrecked penthouse with his hands shaking faintly against my jaw, looking at me like I'd just rearranged something load-bearing in his chest. You flinched, I said quietly. Not a dare this time. Just true. I don't flinch. You did. Just now. I covered one of his hands with mine, steadying us both. Welcome to the club. He didn't argue. He just stood there, in the wreckage of glass and candlelight and a night neither of us had asked for, looking at me like a man who'd finally lost the one negotiation he never saw coming, and didn't mind losing it at all. Dawn came in slow and gray over Brooklyn, the kind of light that makes a wrecked room look almost gentle, like the city was trying to apologize for the night it had handed us. Cleanup crews men who trusted with things like this had already come and gone. Quiet men who didn't ask questions, who carried out broken glass and worse without a single look in my direction. By the time the sun cleared the skyline fully, the only evidence the apartment had a rough night was a faint crack in the marble by the hallway door, and a chair still wedged exactly where I'd left it, like a souvenir neither of us was ready to move yet. I was sitting at the kitchen island in his shirt. Mine, the navy dress, had given up sometime around Chapter 7 and earned its retirement. Sleeves rolled past my wrists, watching him cross the room with a single sheet of paper in his hand. He set it down in front of me, without ceremony. My father's debt. $200,000. The number that had followed me into this penthouse like a verdict. Now just ink on a page he tore cleanly in half, and then in half again, the pieces fluttering onto the counter like something finally allowed to die. You don't owe me anything, he said. I walked in here last night, owing you everything. You walked in here, he said, lowering himself onto the stool across from me, close enough that our knees nearly touched, soaked, furious, and unimpressed with the most dangerous man you'd ever met. You didn't owe me a debt. I think I owed you an apology for thinking money was ever going to be the interesting part of this. I looked at the torn paper, then at him. Tie long gone. Jacket somewhere on the floor of a room I wasn't sure either of us would fully clean tonight. Dark hair messier than I'd seen it. Eyes doing that thing again where he forgot to look anywhere else but at me. So what happens now? I asked. I just go back to my bakery and you go back to being terrifying? I'm not interested in going back to anything. He reached across the counter, fingers finding mine like he'd been waiting all night for permission. I told you. I see you. That's not the kind of thing a man unsees because the sun came up. Somewhere outside, the city was waking up the normal way. Sirens, traffic, the ordinary noise of people who had no idea what had happened 40 floors above their heads. I thought about the bakery, my father's apron, the woman who'd walked in here 4 minutes after deciding she'd only allow herself for minutes to be scared. You never did answer me, I said softly, lacing my fingers through his. Did you last the night? Min, who almost smiled. The real one, finally, unguarded. Barely, he said, and I'd do it again.